Now, Ms. Richards, our next witnesses will be heard together. Let me remind everyone that in their case too, I have made a restriction order in each case forbidding anyone to reveal anything which may identify them by name or pictorially. In the case of the first, who will be known as Miss G, I order as follows. The name and address of witness W2607, that's Miss G to us, the name of her brothers who died, the name of any other member of the witness's family, and any other identifying information such as the witness's image or a description of their appearance cannot be disclosed or published in any form unless express permission is given by me or by the solicitor to the inquiry acting on my behalf. Witness 2607 must be referred to only as Miss G. The order remains in force for the duration of the inquiry and at all times thereafter, unless otherwise ordered, and I may vary or revoke it by making a further order during the course of the inquiry. Now, please forgive me for giving a second order in virtually identical terms, but it has to be done. So I order that the name and address of witness W2449, that will be Mrs. H to us, the name of her brothers who died, the name and any other member of the witness's family, and any other identifying information, such as the witness's image or a description of their appearance, cannot be disclosed or published in any form unless express permission is given by me or by the solicitor to the inquiry acting on my behalf. Witness W2449 must be referred to only as Mrs. H. The order remains in force for the duration of the inquiry and at all times thereafter unless otherwise ordered, and I may vary or revoke it by making a further order during the course of the inquiry. The press have copies of that order. I would ask you all, as before, to respect it, and bear in mind that it is a serious offence not to do so.
And, sir, before the witnesses are sworn, just to underline one point, as you and those who are here will soon hear, they are talking about their brothers who died, and it is not practically or humanly possible for them to give the harrowing testimony they have to give without referring to those brothers by name. And so the effect of your order, sir, is that although the brothers' names will be spoken during the course of their testimony, those names must not be repeated, disclosed or published in any way whatsoever by anyone who hears the evidence here.
Let me have, please, both Miss G and Mrs. H.
Miss G, your full name is known to the inquiry. Could you please take the book in your raised hand and repeat after me? I swear by Almighty God.
I swear by Almighty God.
That the evidence I shall give.
That the evidence I shall give.
Shall be the truth.
Shall be the truth.
The whole truth.
The whole truth.
And nothing but the truth.
Nothing but the truth.
Mrs. H, your full name is known to the inquiry. Please could you take the book in your raised hand and repeat after me? I swear by Almighty God.
I swear by Almighty God.
That the evidence I shall give.
That the evidence I shall give.
Shall be the truth.
Shall be the truth.
The whole truth.
The whole truth.
And nothing but the truth.
And nothing but the truth.
And if you could talk close to the microphone. Thank you.
I'm going to be asking you both a number of questions about the evidence you've given in written form to the inquiry. Please feel free, either one of you at any point, to answer the questions. They're directed almost entirely to both of you at the same time.
Yeah.
You are sisters?
We are.
And you're part of a larger family of siblings,
We are.
and some of them have given evidence in the form of written statements to the inquiry.
Yes, I have it.
And you're here to tell us about what happened to two of your brothers,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and
Yes.
both of those brothers died after being infected with HIV through blood products for their haemophilia.
It
Did.
is.
Now, as I understand it, there were 4 years between them, being the elder of the two.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you first about which of you would in particular like to answer the questions about.
Yeah, okay.
You okay? So, had haemophilia A, and his haemophilia was classified as severe.
It was, yeah.
He was under the care of the haemophilia centre at the Royal Victoria Hospital.
Yeah, in Belfast, yeah.
And we don't, I think, have medical records, but he was, you're aware, given Factor VIII products in the 1970s and 1980s.
Yes, he was, yes.
And one of your other brothers who's provided a statement to the inquiry says of their shared childhood, both your brothers, it seemed that both were never out of hospital. It seemed like they were always going there. Is that right?
Always in hospital. They spent a lot of their life in hospital there. Yeah.
Now, in or around late 1984, early 1985, it appears that was diagnosed with HIV.
That's right.
Were either of you aware of that at the time?
Not at the time, no.
And at a later stage, also found out that he had been infected with hepatitis C. Do you know when that was?
No, we're not aware, no.
In the middle of 1995, he became very ill. What can you recall about what happened?
Was working and he was painting in a house and he took a pain on his big toe and he says to my other brother, he says, I need to go home, I feel unwell. So I went home and that night he ended up on the Royal in Belfast and that was in May, say the middle of May, I'm not sure of the date. And took very ill from then. They went through having radiation treatment. His condition just deteriorated and within 12 weeks he was dead.
He died in 1995.
Yeah.
And he was, I think, either 31 or 32
28.
years old.
28.
28, I'm sorry,
Yeah,
28 years
28.
old at the time. His condition deteriorated rapidly once he was admitted to hospital in the way you've described.
He did, he did.
And you've described in your witness statements death as a very distressing, lingering death.
It was, yeah.
He had a brain tumour,
Yeah.
and that was a consequence or complication of his infection with HIV,
His
through
HIV,
the use
yes.
of blood products.
Yeah.
What were the arrangements, if you can recall them, for the funeral?
Whenever he died, he was married. So whenever he passed on, his remains were taken to his house. Whenever family went to the house, the coffin was closed, which I found very distressing because the last time I'd seen was about, say, 2 weeks before. I was heavily pregnant with my first child. And I never got to say goodbye. And this is it really eats me, it angers me. The casket was closed. So the last memories I have of my brother, seeing him face to face, was in a ward in the Royal Victoria Hospital. And
Wasting away.
just wasting away, and he did not look like the brother that I had grown up with. I'm the eldest of the siblings. He was just disformed looking, and it was just horrible to watch. And then the funeral the casket wasn't open. I found that very hard to comprehend that. No, why we couldn't see him. It was just a picture of him, and very handsome looking fella. I have to say that. All we had was a photograph of him, you know, and anybody that's from the faith that we're from, you would have like the 2-day wake, and people come and that and don't have. We had the wake and all, but we didn't see him, you know, and it's just left a terrible mark on me. So.
At that point, Dane's HIV infection had been kept a secret.
Yes.
Including from the wider family members.
And Mummy and Daddy never knew that it was HIV until he was dead.
And when did both of you find out in relation to that he had been HIV positive and that had played its role in his death?
I had gone to the Royal with Mummy and Daddy, and a lady doctor came and told us, and she just told us that he had HIV and was going to die, you know.
And Miss G, you found out, I think,
1999.
only a number of years later,
Yeah.
at the same time as finding out about your other brother. So we'll come back to
Yeah.
that. And left a widow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And with your agreement, I'm just going to briefly read a passage from the statement of Dr. Main. Forgive me. In relation to Dr. Main has said this in her witness statement, and I know you've seen it. I would say his tragic passing remains to the forefront of this ancient doctor's memory. His young wife and his parents were unbelievably brave. And she talks of the awfulness of the effects of the brain tumour and how supportive and very kind your parents and his wife were.
Yeah.
Now that was 1995, as you've described. Now, your other brother also had severe haemophilia A.
Yeah.
And it's clear from your statements that in his childhood, for example, he missed a lot of school. Now, you've got some medical records for Tony, or you had at the time you gave your statement some medical records for Tony, but you expressed a concern in your witness statement that you only had one file and you knew there were other files.
Yes.
What were you told, if anything, about what had happened to the remaining notes?
We were told that they were lost, couldn't be found in both hospitals, Galvin and Belfast, that they had one piece of paper and it fell down the back of a filing cabinet when they were transferring files, and this piece of paper, that's all we had, and a file 6, file 5, 4, 5, the other files were missing. So.
And then towards the end of last week, your solicitors were informed that 5 files of medical records had been found somewhere.
Yeah, have turned up, yeah.
You've not yet had the chance to look properly through
No.
those.
No.
And you're going to do that after you've given your evidence
Yeah.
with the support of your legal team.
Yeah.
Now, the records that we do have and your own recollections make clear that you also received Factor 8 products.
Yes.
Yeah.
In the 1970s and 1980s. And you've described, Miss G, in your statement, your parents being trained in how to administer the Factor 8 products at home.
Yes.
But from the mid-teens or so, he was able to administer them to himself.
Yeah, or maybe a bit slightly older, yeah.
You've said in your statements that there was never any suggestion there were any risks associated with the Factor 8. Everyone assumed it was safe, the best treatment available, as it had been recommended by our doctors.
That's right.
Is that your understanding?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You've obviously, more recently, since the death of your brothers, discussed this as a family and discussed this with your parents.
Yeah.
Is it your understanding that no information about the risks of infection were
No.
given to your parents or to either of your brothers?
No.
None whatsoever.
Now, I think you know, because you've been told by your legal team who've been able to have some look through your medical records, that there are references in towards the end of 1983 to his liver enzymes being persistently raised, and indeed the possibility that he might be developing AIDS was raised in correspondence. And I'm going to ask you to look at two documents, and they'll come up on the screens in front of you. The first is 2607003. And you'll see there it's a letter dated the 25th of January 1985. It's about your brother. And it says in the first paragraph, it's from Dr. Main to another doctor, I feel I ought to tell you that I've had his HTLV3 result and he is positive. And then if we just look at a second document before I ask you about them, 2607004. This is a letter dated the 12th of February 1985 from Dr. Main. It's addressed to your parents, and it says this. I'm sure that by now you will have heard that, and it's your brother's blood sample was positive for the AIDS-related virus. I feel I would like to point out to you that this indicates that he's encountered the AIDS virus sometime in the past and does not necessarily mean he's going to develop AIDS. I hope you will have realised this from the information that I sent home with, and that's your other brother's name, some time ago. Now, we'll leave that document on screen, please, because we need to look at the next paragraph in a moment. But this appears to suggest that he was diagnosed or had been diagnosed by this time with HIV, and that this information was being shared with him and with your parents. What's your understanding of what your parents knew?
Our parents didn't know anything about this. No, they never knew. It was only whenever the boys were on their dying beds that Mum and Daddy found out that they were...
That's when it was dying, that's when they found out. You know.
If we look at the second paragraph of this letter, please. Picking it up in the second line, it says this: it's necessary in view of the positivity that all the rest of the family contacts should have their bloods checked, and also any other contacts that he might have established. Therefore, I would ask you to bring the children and yourselves up to the haemophilia outpatient clinic on Friday the 1st of March 1985 at 10:30 a.m. It's not necessary to test, and there's your brother's name again, but I would like to see the other members of the family, as I'm sure you will have several queries and worries about this problem. Now, you both recall, as I understand it, and you've both referred to it in your witness statements, the family going, yourselves, your siblings, your parents, to be tested in March 1985. What was your understanding of the purpose of those tests?
We were going to the Royal. All of our family, a minibus came and collected us and took us up, and we were going up to do the family tree as severe haemophiliacs, and Dr. Meehan wanted to check the rest of the family to see who was affected. Nothing about what we see in front of us. Not at all.
So your understanding was that you were being tested to see either who else might have haemophilia, or in your cases, whether you might be carriers of haemophilia.
Carriers, yeah.
Do you think that's what your parents understood?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You have subsequently learnt that the purpose of that visit was for you to be tested, for you all to be tested for HIV.
Jenny, when we got these records, they completed an utter shock and horror when we seen that letter, because we thought we were going to get tested, and I'm a haemophilia carrier myself. My son has haemophilia, and if we were getting all them tests done up there, you know, would have come back because I was a carrier. I was told I wasn't a carrier. My sister was told she wasn't a carrier, she is a carrier. That none of our family was affected, and when my son got diagnosed, doctor in the Royal told me, your son has severe haemophilia A, and Daddy was so angry. Because we were told years ago that I wasn't a carrier. You know,
And that your understanding that you weren't a carrier was based upon your understanding that in March 1985, that had been the purpose of this family visit to the hospital.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, was diagnosed with HIV, but the stigma associated with that diagnosis was such that your statements explain that it was kept secret even from you and your fellow siblings at that stage.
Yeah.
And as far as you're concerned, even from your parents.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just wanted to read a short passage from your witness statements about this part of life. You've said this: no longer alive to speak for himself, but he must have been absolutely devastated to have been diagnosed with HIV in the mid-1980s. At that time, HIV was considered to be an inevitable death sentence. Terrifying adverts were being run on television and on the radio warning about the dangers. Sufferers from HIV were often stigmatised and regarded as authors of their own tragic misfortune. It was associated with gay sex, promiscuity, drug abuse and the like. Living in a rural and Catholic community in Northern Ireland, it must have been terrible for Tim, and he must have greatly feared his diagnosis leaking out and people coming to the wrong conclusion. And looking back now, that's your assessment of the kinds of things that must have been going through your mind at the time.
Definitely.
like we couldn't even comprehend what is going through my mind. I know if I was sat down and told I had HIV and got it through no fault of my own, I can just, your brain would be in turmoil.
And I'm going to, again, read out, with your agreement, a passage from Dr. Main's statement, which talks about the stigma that he faced. And Dr. Main has said this: as a general note, living in a rural Catholic community with a diagnosis of HIV must have been terrible for Tim. Possibly it was why the HIV status was kept so confidential. I am aware, however, that someone leaked the information locally and the army patrols learnt of the HIV. They hounded by shouting sickening verbal abuse relative to homosexuality. I guess the soldiers would never have heard of haemophilia and drew completely the wrong conclusions. And then Dr. Main relates a particular experience she had with follows. I recall that one day he phoned me from a public telephone box. He was desperate, he felt hemmed in and wished to commit suicide. He asked me to do something and quickly. And then she goes on to explain how she made some calls and tried to send somebody to assist Tony and make him feel safe.
Yeah.
I think one of you have some recollection of one of either that experience or a similar experience that you went through that you learnt about subsequently. Is that right?
Yeah, I knew was one time suicidal, and he had got into a car and put the hose pipe on, but he didn't commit suicide. He just was so suicidal. He had a death sentence hanging over him. No, and to me, I've always said from day one, my two brothers have been murdered. No, I've said that from day one, and that's the way I feel, and I won't change. So, try to put myself in his shoes. I could understand where the thoughts of suicide would come into your head. No, you're living with this here, and anybody that knows through the troubles, the security forces, they give such a hell of a time, such a rough time, and it would push anybody to the brink of maybe suicide.
You've said in your statements that the diagnosis had a devastating effect on, in particular after his brother's death in 1995.
Yeah.
How in particular did that affect him?
I remember the time he took sick. I was in the car with and his partner, and the words I could hear him saying, in hospital 2 days, and he says, that's him.
Said
That's him.
that was him. That was going to be.
That's him finished. He
You
says,
didn't.
that's finished, like. And now when I look back, I didn't understand what he meant, but he knew what was in front of he knew what was in front of him. Like, could you try and live with that?
You've put it this way in your statements that went into self-destruct mode.
Yeah, definitely.
Never having previously been a heavy drinker or anything other than a social drinker, he became a heavy drinker.
He became a heavy drinker and was just
Self-destruct.
self-destruct, and it was so soul-destroying for us to watch, because after watching what came through, he knew, well, that's going to be probably ahead for me.
And felt that he was under a death sentence after
Yeah.
death.
Yes.
In about May of 1997, you understand that commenced treatment in relation to the HIV, but he reacted adversely to aspects of the drug therapy and developed pancreatitis.
Yes.
And so his treatment had to be altered. And then it's your understanding that at some point in around, you think, 1999, that he was informed that he'd also been infected with hepatitis C.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's that date. Anyway, we're not quite sure.
Now, I think at one point you received a handwritten letter
Yeah.
through your letterbox. What can you
Yeah.
tell us about that?
It was in 1996. It was a year after he died. And on the letter was a hand-posted note through my letterbox. I live not far from Mummy. And the letter would says, you need to go and get yourself checked for HIV. So I was like, I didn't even know the boys had HIV or anything else. So I took a letter over to Mummy. It was there, along my Mummy. And I says to Mum, you know, I got this letter. And when I look back now, the look on my mother's face was hard. She says, where did you get that? I says, it was posted through my door. And she says, no, pay no heed to that. And she threw the letter in the fire.
And it was a handwritten letter, and you've never
It was
known who it was
a
from.
handwritten letter.
And you yourself at this time still didn't know either about
No.
diagnosis or what was going through. You've described in your statement some of the physical effects on this time, terrible night sweats as a reaction to the drugs he was taking.
Yeah.
What else can you tell us about how it affected physically?
His moods and...
It was not down. It seemed to be like in a depression, deep depression. I remember Mummy having to change the bed maybe every 2 or 3 hours because of the sweats, you know, and the mattress, you know.
There were 3 more mattresses.
And 3 more mattresses, and, you know.
Now, by this time, he was in a long-term relationship with the girlfriend. And in around 1999, she was told that she too had HIV.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what you've said in your statements about that is that he must have assumed he'd infected her. It must have been a terrible thing for him. He must have been riddled and burdened with guilt.
Yeah.
And you've put it this way, by now he was in a very dark place.
He was.
He was.
Now, you found out, Ms. G, in 1999 about the diagnosis. How
Yeah.
did that come about?
I was at work and my wife rang me. But no, she didn't ring me. She came up to me work and she took me out of work and she says, I'm not going to talk to you in the car. I'll talk to you down in the house. So she says, HIV positive. That's what happened to her husband as well, my brother. And I just couldn't comprehend what she was saying.
You've put it this way in your statement. I was traumatised and in complete shock. I felt physically sick and started to shake. It is a day that I will never forget, and in fact, you've given the exact date in your statement. I found it difficult to grasp at exactly what I was being told. I thought he was going to die as he was in hospital. It was a horrendous time.
Yeah.
You've also said in your statements that despite everything that was happening to the time, he tried his very best to get on with life and to work. What can you tell us about as an individual at that time?
He was a real character.
He was a happy-go-lucky boy, and anybody knew him. He had an outgoing personality. He drove taxis, you know, and he was great company to be in.
You had to understand, he's very witty, but you had to know what way to take his wit, if you know what I mean. Yeah. And then he would never show his emotions. He's not one for talking. He wouldn't talk about his feelings, but
Now, physical and mental health continued to be adversely affected and to deteriorate.
yeah.
And then he died suddenly on the 16th of December 2002.
That's correct.
How old was he?
39.
And he was found at his home on the floor, collapsed by his girlfriend.
Yeah.
And you've said in your statements that at least he was spared the lingering death.
Yeah.
What can you tell us about the funeral arrangements for family and how they, again, differed from what you would normally have?
Same as coffin sealed tight, photo on top of it. Like it just takes that personal away to say goodbye, things like that, and it stays with you.
Am I right in thinking he had anticipated that, and he told people that that's how his funeral was going to be, with a closed casket?
Because he knew by that his casket was going to be closed. He used to say, "I don't want such and such looking at me and looking at me," and he used to say, "I don't want her looking at me," and the critter knew what was in front of him, so he knew his coffin was going to be shut.
And do you think he was trying to avoid questions being asked?
Yeah, probably.
Why is the coffin shut? And
Now, death certificate, you said in your statement, shows pneumonia as the cause of his death,
Yeah.
and doesn't make a reference to HIV or AIDS.
None whatsoever.
What view, if any, do you have about that?
Well, I think they had pneumonia and then something to do with haemophilia, cause of haemophilia. But there was nothing to say about the HIV
or hepatitis
hepatitis C. Why was that not on his death certificate whenever he had it?
Yeah. It's stage 3 HIV. It's on his notes. He would have been dead in 3 years. He died in less than a year.
Less than a year.
When he got to stage 3.
What was the impact of death on your family, who previously suffered the bereavement of death? What was the toll that was taken on your parents and on you and your brothers and sisters?
Sort of broke the family,
It's just nothing has ever been the same.
No, family occasions and missed out, and maybe them being uncles, nieces, nephews, special occasions in our lives. There's always a void. Like we got a family photograph the year before he died. We were all together, like there's 10 of us. And that was the last family photograph, And then a few years ago, there was a special occasion. And somebody says, we'll get another family photo, And I guess an impact as well, Two missing,
And I feel like they've robbed my son of 2 uncles.
Shall I read a couple of the things you've said in your statements for you?
Yeah.
About how you felt. So, Miss G, this is your statement. And you've said this: "I hugely miss my brother. I miss him every day. He would have been great with my young son, who also suffers from haemophilia. I would have given him the benefit of his advice and experience of dealing with the condition." And you said this in your statement about, "I greatly miss my brother. We were very close in age. We were best of friends, as well as being brother and sister."
Yeah.
What's the impact been on your parents, who lost 2 sons?
Daddy and Mummy's. we talked to Daddy the night before we came up to Belfast, and he is riddled with guilt. He feels guilty. He thinks that whether they were giving the boys their injections, their treatments, but now, no one now, but they know. He feels that maybe they were part of.
Giving them the HIV, injected it into their son's system.
And no,
You know, they thought they were helping their sons, and they put the trust in
and the treatment and
the treatment, trusted their doctors, trusted, you know. Like, if you can't trust your doctor, who can you trust?
You have said in your statements that it's affected your trust in the medical profession. You've
Yeah.
explained
Yeah.
have a son with haemophilia. It's
Yeah.
affected the trust that you feel towards the doctors.
Yeah.
And what about fears for your own health? Has that been something that's crossed your mind as well?
Yeah, we went to inquiry in London last year. We as a family, after, you know, saying people should get checked for Hep C and things like that. So when I came back, I phoned Dr. Gary Benson in Belfast, as he's my son's consultant as well. And I rang him and I says, Gary, we were over at the inquiry in London and we'd like to get checked for hepatitis and HIV. And, oh yes, we can do that, and it won't be on your records, you know, that would show up in the GPs. And then, so that was okay. We went and got the test done, and thank God, they all came back negative. And
but I went to a clinic in a hospital that I don't go to, and I had a problem with my heart, and I was going back for a checkup. I got a phone call to come back, and the doctor had taken my blood pressure. Oh, your blood pressure's up. And I thought, maybe that's just what's coming in here. And she says, right, well, wait a minute, and we'll do it again. And she was battering away in the computer. Oh, I see. You've been to the hematology for tests. Well, I near passed out in the chair. Because I said, right. And I said, right. That had nothing to do with the clinic that I was at. I said, I was shocked because
we were told
we were told it was going to be confidential.
Yes.
Nobody else was going to find out about this. I said to her, I said, right, I'll just tell you now what it's about. I said, I lost 2 brothers to the NHS disaster, contaminated blood. It's something that never should have happened. And I said, I went to the trial, or went to the inquiry in London, and got talking to people and that. And I said, we went as a family in to get checked. And I said, that is why. It's probably on my notes, and it's on all our records. Yeah.
One thing that you both expressed anger about in your statements is in relation to your parents. There's never been any recognition of their loss. No apology, you've said in your
no
statement.
apology, no
financial
compensation,
assistance.
no nothing, as if they don't exist.
They
Like
say to be forgotten.
Yeah. They've lost not one son, they've lost 2, and they were murdered. That's the way our family see it. They were murdered, they were given dirty blood. They knew it was dirty, but they went ahead and gave it to him anyway. And I killed them. And nobody will ever change our thoughts. They were murdered, and that's it.
Have your parents ever been offered any counselling or any form of emotional support other than obviously the support they get from their family?
No.
None whatsoever.
What about the 2 of you?
I went myself. I sought professional help, which I had to pay for myself, for my own sanity. I was finding it very hard to cope, and I sought help and I paid for it myself. You know.
I'm waiting. When I came back from the inquiry in London, I was so low. I'm still waiting on CBT 7 months later. So I've been on antidepressants, and then because I can't comprehend the horror stories that we have heard and what my 2 brothers went through, how it has been going on so long and nothing has been done about it. I just can't get my head around it at all. It's like being in your own horror film. That's the only way to explain it.
You've both said this in your statements about your brothers. Never had a chance. They didn't have a life. They were given death sentences.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does that sum up how you
Yeah.
feel about it?
Yeah.
As I said at the beginning, you're going to look through the records that you've only very recently been given and draw anything you feel relevant in those records through your legal team to the inquiry's attention.
Yes.
Yeah.
But is there anything else you'd like to add now?
Just now, I'd just like to thank Sir Brian for letting us talk about our experience, talk about what we've went through as a family. It's the first time that we've talked public about it.
Yeah.
It's just a living nightmare. It's something that has happened. It should never have happened. We shouldn't have to go through this. I feel my parents, they're both elderly now. They've been living with this, and they've had no answers, no explanation why their two sons were taken from them. And that's just...
You know, no explanations. They're just, you don't matter. You know, this is the way it's coming across. And they live with guilt, Jenny, every single day. I'm a mother. And if I thought I did that to my two sons, I couldn't cope. You know, if I thought I injected something in their arms, even though it wasn't their fault, I don't think I could cope. I don't know how to do it.
I'm just going to ask Mr. Williams, who represents you both, if there's anything further he wants. There's nothing further. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
You've thanked me. It's actually me who should be thanking you on behalf of the inquiry for coming to give your accounts. It's never easy, particularly to go public for the first time. So thank you very much for your courage in doing so. Now, Ms. Richards, we've reached the end of proceedings for today.
We have, sir.
Tomorrow we start at 10.
Yes.
And who do we have tomorrow?
We have, first of all, Nigel Hamilton, who'll be giving evidence first. We then have, separately, two anonymous witnesses, who, for present purposes, I'll refer to as Mr. I and then Mrs. J. And then we have three members of a family giving evidence about what happened to their family members. And they'll be giving evidence together.
Very well. So 10 o'clock tomorrow.